Advertising has us chasing cars and clothes, working jobs we hate so we can buy shit we don't need.
Hello. Welcome everyone to the 8th episode of the Project Uproar podcast. Today we are going to be talking about minimalism, a topic I'm very excited about.
Yeah, if you remember our last podcast on the slow movement, Igor spent the last bit of the episode really talking up this topic and mentioning how so far, I think you said it's your favorite topic that we may deal with.
What do you mean?
By favorite, I mean like most kind of impactful, I guess.
I'm excited about it. It definitely probably will be one of the most impactful ones, but the most, I don't know. We've talked about the war of art, man. I don't think I've said that, but whatever. The point is, you're right that it was huge, and I'm very excited about it. Minimalism is something I've always kind of heard around, but I didn't know really what it meant, and I found this as like a good excuse. The fact that we have this podcast to actually do some research about it and do an episode on it, and I'm glad we did because one of the books I accidentally stumbled upon was Goodbye Things, which I mentioned last podcast, by Fumio Sasaki, and it was freaking awesome. It was amazing. So it's called Goodbye Things, the New Japanese Minimalism. Even the cover is very minimalistic, and I think it does an awesome job of just talking about, through minimalism, life, and just talk about cool philosophical concepts that we've seen in different ways, including with the Stoics, but in like a more modern way, since he's like a 35-year-old currently living in Japan, and it's much more updated with like all the new technologies we have now than something we'd read from Seneca, for example.
Yeah, for sure. And I think from my research so far, I'm just getting into this line of thought, but it appears that by minimalism, we're not just talking about, right, physically thinking through your physical surroundings, but also mentally as well, and also just the way one lives one's life. They're all connected, yeah. So by minimalism, I think there are many different avenues we could go down today, and I think the book alludes to it as well. Another book that you may stumble across if you're at chapters is The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up.
Yes, by Marie Kondo, which I've been reading too. I'm not finished, but I read over half of it, and it's also very good. Probably we'll touch upon that. The importance of just also discarding things you don't need and that don't spark joy in your life, and how you can positively impact your life through your surroundings.
For sure. I do want to start off with a quote from Goodbye Things that I found was interesting. So Goodbye Things talks about the author's experience, going through his own house, his own, does he have a house or apartment? I'm trying to think back.
I believe it's an apartment.
Yeah. Going through his home, his apartment. And in it, he talks about, it's often said that cleaning your house is like polishing yourself. It isn't just dust and dirt that accumulates in your homes. It's also the shadows of our past selves that let that dust and dirt continue to build. Cleaning the grime is certainly unpleasant, but more than that, it's the need to face our own past deeds that makes it so tough. And he goes on to say, when you have the benefits of having fewer material things. So yeah, so almost, there's kind of like a psychological process going on when you're going through your things, right? I know yourself, you have really been applying this book to your own life, and you showed me before the episode today your own room and how you've, I believe, taken off some posters off your wall.
Yeah, taken off some posters, thrown out some things. You saw garbage bags in my room. Yeah, kind of out with the old stuff that like I kind of know was there, but I never really used.
Absolutely, yeah. And a lot of these things, like the author suggested, they're significant because they're not just these abstract things. They're connected, a lot of these things, to our past some way.
Yes.
Right? So it's very tough psychologically because we're also dealing with our past when we're going through these things and deciding what to keep and what to throw away or what to donate or what to give to someone else. I know something that we were having a conversation about. I'm like, the one thing I would never donate or throw or give to someone as, a gift are books, because I feel I have a deep connection with them. And really, like, I wonder
With
why
all
is
of
this
them, though.
With all of them, that's the
That's
thing.
the question.
Yes, and
No,
I
because
wonder.
I don't even believe you that you say you have connections with all of them.
I don't
like, do you have
have.
with some textbooks from school?
Well, that's the thing. I don't, especially after reading this book. It's making me rethink. I think I just love the idea of having books. It's just like a collection, right? And we could get into maybe collections later, because people have a lot of like fetishistic like obsessions with certain collections.
Yeah, you should probably like explain what you mean when you say fetish.
Well, like you hear people
What
saying,
is it?
almost like a fetish to collect certain things, such as, I've heard people collecting stamps or T-shirts or mugs, but to the point where it's just like there's hoarding. There's no personal connection. It's just a matter of, oh, here's a mug. I'm going to take it and just accumulate, put it into my kitchen, and it's just going to accumulate just for the sake of having it.
Yeah.
And so I think at this stage, I'm like that with books. I feel that the more books, almost the better, right?
Yes.
I don't think necessarily like, and there are
to
times.
give you guys a background, we're both English. We were English majors in undergrad and graduate school and university. So we have a very specific kind of connection with books.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have, if ever we went to see a professor, we'd just be surrounded by books. And I think like they have a similar obsession, the idea that like books give you, in a sense, your identity, or it can for some people, right? You walk into someone's room.
It's like anything. For some people, it's a jacket. For some people, it's a car, right? And for us, it can definitely be books.
Yeah. And like, I think myself, what the books represent is like, it's the hard work that I put in during my university experience, also outside of university. So yeah, it does have a very deep connection to my past. And that's why for myself, it's difficult to think of getting rid of any of them, because they each have some sort of, or just as a collective themselves, they have this symbolic significance to me.
Collective, yes, but aren't there books you bought that you haven't read?
Yes, I'll have to say collective more than individual.
Yes.
There are individual connections, obviously, but as a collective, I think like I feel accomplished that I have these books in a way, even though I haven't even read them. But they very much make me up as a collective.
The consumerist dream, right there.
Yeah, to have books.
You feel accomplished before you even use the the consumption.
But yeah, I mean, it's a difficult process psychologically to go through, to rethink your life and think what is essential and what is just there just for the sake of being there.
And this is one of the things that, like, everything we do, we kind of face different areas of life. So in one episode we face school, in one episode we face like starting and facing your fears, in one episode we faced slowing down as opposed to speeding up all the time, and the potential benefits of that. So with these podcast episodes, we're just trying to approach kind of improving life and just talk about ideas because they're interesting from different areas. And so it's that idea of Kaizen, improving 1%, and we're talking about all these different areas, and minimalism is a very interesting one. And Marie Kondo says, if you want to kind of think about throwing out your books, Ryan, which of course you don't, because obviously the point of minimalism, and I think often I watch some YouTube videos about it, and people think it often scares people off because they think of a person in an empty room with a chair, and like that's what they associate with minimalism. But it's actually it can be moderated, I guess, minimalism, or you can do your own version of minimalism, which doesn't have to be bare bones. You can keep stuff like your books. If you love your books, if you love reading them, lending them out, you can totally keep that. That's not against minimalism. It's just Marie Kondo says, take each book in your hand and see if it brings you joy. So if it sparks joy, that's kind of her idea. And you have to actually take it in your hand and not just look at it on the shelf to see if it does or not. And if it doesn't, follow your kind of gut feeling and throw it out if it doesn't, or give it to someone who might want it. But again, we're not trying to say you need to be an extremist. I tend to be an extremist about things, and I'm planning to throw away like a bunch of stuff I already started. But again, there are things like my books. I'm not at that level where I'm like throwing out books. I also haven't, like Ryan, gotten to that level, but I have decided to buy more Kindle books moving forward, since I have a Kindle and I just feel like my books do take up a lot of space. So it just makes sense to be less tethered or less like kind of owned by the things around me, as they say in Fight Club, if I can just bring my Kindle anywhere, right? But like I feel like I'm stuck with all these books sometimes, and let's say I want to move, it'll take so long just to move the books. So that's kind of a part of it. The idea in the book, Goodbye Things, a very cool thing I liked was he said he could pretty much collect all his things and move them out of the house in 30 minutes. Like, that's insane.
Oh, I know.
I've helped many people moving, some people multiple times, and it's always like a grueling process. It always takes so long. And these were people who were in universities, so they were just like temporarily there. They didn't even live there, and I was like helping them move the stuff back to their home. And it's like, even there it took long, let alone if you're moving all the stuff that you have collected throughout your whole life.
Yeah, for sure. And I think what he's trying to say is like, don't necessarily stop consuming. Like, we can't just get away from consuming. It's impossible. We have to consume at some level. But I think he's trying to get us to be more thoughtful consumers, right?
Yes. So consume, in a sense, what you truly love and what gives you value, and be a conscious consumer rather than being an autopilot, being a sheep, for example, and just seeing an advertisement. You don't need it, you don't think about it, you just buy it with one click.
Absolutely.
It's actually being conscious of it.
Which, when you look at Amazon, it's very dangerous.
Very easy to.
Yes.
Amazon is great and bad. It's a tool. It's how you use it, right? So you could use it to spend a lot of money on stuff you don't really need, or you can use it to quickly get stuff you actually like. And definitely, I've been quick to pull the trigger. Like, there's even like a one-click checkout kind of thing.
You don't even need to put your information in. Yeah.
So it's so quick that definitely it's very easy to be a consumer in today's society, like a heavy consumer, and buy things you don't need. So I think a book like Minimalism, like on minimalism, can be useful for anyone, or just discussing the ideas.
Yeah, he also talks about gratitude, which I find interesting, in how when you become more of a minimalist, you're more gracious when, let's just say, you're given things or you have things. Which I remember, I don't know if I had this conversation with you, but talking about things like your birthday or Christmas, right? When you were a kid, when you didn't have access to certain funds, right, it would just be, you'd be so gracious or excited whenever you receive something, especially something you really wanted. Nowadays, it's just so easy to get anything, right? You could get, if you wanted one thing, really, if you come from a middle income, right, you could really acquire anything you really desire. There's no sort of wait or pain you have to go through to get something.
And it depends what scale, right? Houses are a different story.
Houses, yeah.
Cars,
but if we're talking about just,
let's say, a toy,
any sort of object, a book, or even a toy in terms of, some sort of tool or something, right? You could get it fairly easy now. So yeah, so being a minimalist and really narrowing down what's important, I think, makes you more gracious. And the book goes through this process of thinking through when you're going through some of your items. And what the book says is, if you're struggling to part with something, ask yourself certain questions like, are you struggling to part with it because it was expensive at one point, right? That's something that when I'm talking to people, it's just like, well, I can't throw this out. It was really expensive at the time, right? I can't just, I'm wasting my money,
stuff,
right? Especially large items. Or is it because you feel just guilty? Are you ashamed? That you never made any good use out of it, right? You bought this thing and it's just like, it just sat in my basement and I can't just throw it away. I wasted my money. So going back to this idea of wasting your money, which goes back to your time. Another one is, if it was a gift, do you feel bad that someone gave it to you, right? And it's just like, by giving this away, I'm betraying this person. So there's just so many different psychological dimensions in terms of when you struggle with
tips to deal with all of them, including, like, did that person really want you to be unhappy with the thing? Or was it the thought that counts, and you should appreciate and be grateful, and then be able to let go of the object?
Yeah.
And a lot of this raises those questions, but also gives useful tips to actually deal with them.
And it's especially difficult when you're thinking about an object that maybe someone who passed gave to you, right? Like a dead relative. And, you're thinking, I have this wine barrel or something large, and you're just like, I can't give it away, I'm betraying something. But then you got to think back to, going back to that moment. It was a great gesture in the moment, but would this person really care for me to have it right now if they were alive?
Yeah, and a very useful tip that he gave that I used when I was throwing out some stuff was taking pictures of it. So in that way, you take a picture of it. So anytime you look at that picture, you can save those pictures. Every time you look at that picture, you can be grateful that for the person who gave you that stuff and remember the nice gesture, but you don't have to necessarily keep all that stuff.
Yeah.
So I did that with like stuff like letters, for example. I had a bunch and I was like, okay, I could keep them, but there isn't really a need to keep them all. So I took pictures of some and threw them away. So with stuff like that, it would be hard to just part with them. But if you take pictures, it's much easier to kind of do it, because if you wanted to, you could always read them back, but they're not taking up space in your room, psychological space or physical space.
Yeah. And when you think about it, I remember he said like a lot of the stuff he takes pictures of, he doesn't even necessarily go back to, but it's just that comfort of, it helps him get through the process of being able to get rid of something. So just having that comfort in mind that he can go back and look at something is helped him to go through this process.
Exactly. And Ryan, just in case, because I assumed you'd ask me, just like last time, what the definition is, like you did with the slow movement kind of thing. I also got when he defined what a minimalist is in the book on page 44. He said, a person who knows what is truly essential for him or herself, who reduces the number of possessions that they have for the sake of things that are really important to them. So again, it's not just kind of throwing away stuff, and for the sake of it, it's focusing on what's really important for you. So let's say, like you said, Ryan, you can appreciate the stuff you have more when you don't have a bunch of stuff. If stuff isn't constantly distracting you. For example, he didn't think he needed a TV. And so he got rid of his TV. And he ended up reading more and writing more, which is something he feels better about and is more passionate about because he didn't have that distraction. Ryan did something similar. I remember him telling me his mom, for his birthday, I believe, or Christmas, got you an Xbox 360. And you're like, I'm not going to use this, so I'm just going to like return it, right? So you didn't even entertain the idea of having it because you knew it would just be a distraction, or best case scenario, you wouldn't use it. So why have it clog up space?
Yeah, for sure. And that was a horrible idea. I hate to say this about my mom, but yeah, when I got it, I kind of just thought, oh, well, this is an interesting gift. I don't know if I'd ever use it. I don't play video games, but okay, cool. So as well, something that he mentions about the qualities he looks for whenever he purchases physical things, which I found was interesting. So there are a certain criteria he thinks through in his head. The first one is, does the item have like a minimalist type of shape? So is it easy to clean? Number two, is its color isn't too loud. Number three, will I be able to use it for a long time, which I think is a very important thing to consider. Number four, does it have a simple structure? Number five, it's lightweight and compact. And number six, which I think is a very important criteria as well, does it have multiple uses, right? Are you going to go back to that multiple times a day? Which, going back to the Xbox, I think my mom purchased it because I had another system I was watching Netflix from, and that was expiring. So she thought the Xbox would be the perfect gift so I could watch Netflix on, but I'm like, I could just get a USB and watch it on there
it's kind of overkill
for $30.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, I would only get one use out of this Xbox, not multiple. So why bother have it when I could get something which its main use, its only use is the use I need it for.
And I think the distraction, the cutting away of the unnecessary. Bruce Lee was all about that. It's very much in accordance with Japanese Zen philosophy, which Fumio Sasaki talks about in his book. The idea of it's just as important, if not more important, what you don't do as what you do. And the point is, you want to cut out the distractions that aren't serving your purpose, what you want to do. So for example, video games, if you don't feel satisfied, if you don't get value from that, it makes sense that you'd want to cut that out to make room for what you do, which is reading, writing. It could be something else for someone else. But I think that that's very important to just not only focus on what you want, but to also focus on how you can make what you want to do easier by cutting out distractions and superfluous things. Because today, with like just between the streaming services I have, because I am a YouTuber and I do need like to have access to new anime and I want to do it legally, so I do have some services which I use for my business. But I could literally never come out of my room, watch TV all day. Like there's literally endless things to watch. And if I actually let that become a distraction, it could very easily do so. But I limit it to my use to it, and I structure my day, so I do usually the important stuff first, and then sometimes at the end of the day I'll watch some stuff that may come in handy for my business and stuff like that. But I think if you don't even use it for your job, for example, and you don't feel good about watching TV, it's just something you go to, then it might be a good job to just, sell your TV. You'd be surprised by how much you can get away with if you just don't give yourself that option. And I think one of the great things that I'm getting in a lot of minimalist stuff is to minimize the amount of stuff you get for other people or for appearance's sake, to appear like, let's say, impressive to others. So let's say a car that other people would respect, some clothing other people would respect, and to just stick to what you really like. A tip I heard on the YouTube was, don't buy clothes because they're trendy. Only buy them if you would have bought it anyways before you knew it was trendy. So that was just one example. I know with my clothes, I'm pretty basic. I used to be more funny enough when I had less money and less income. I used to try to wear like brand names, like, Burberry, Armani, stuff like that, Hugo Boss, stuff like that. And now mostly I'm just wearing like non-name stuff. Like I bought 6 white t-shirt V-necks for $20. So like I'm just not focusing on it at all. And I know a lot of people do that. Steve Jobs always had the same outfit. The creator of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, also sticks to very similar clothing. He doesn't think about what he wears. I saw on YouTube there was someone who recommended just bought 6 or 7 of everything, the same shirt, wears it every day, doesn't think about it. That's an extreme example, but it lets you focus on more important things and not superficial stuff like what clothing you're wearing.
Yes, we all have to be like Homer Simpson with the same outfit.
I mean, it's not a bad idea.
Yeah.
Because you don't have to think about it. You stop being superficial. You stop being easily swayed by clothing you see in advertisements and stuff like that. And it transfers over to other areas of your life. You're going to be less affected by nice cars, for example, if you aren't affected by quote unquote nice clothing. That's unnecessary but is expensive. Now, if you're really passionate about like fashion and stuff like that, then that's something that you want to do, then go for it. But if you're like me and you don't really care about clothes yourself, then why spend all this money, which in the end transfers to freedom? Because the more money you have, that means the more freedom you have to do what you like. Because when you don't have freedom, when you don't have money, you have to kind of do a job you don't like to pay off your debt or whatever. So for me, I'd rather be able to do what I love every day, or to do what I want, and be able to structure my own day and wear like clothes that get the job done, than, for example, get a nice car, get a nice house, get nice clothes, but then have to work a job I hate every day. So that's my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. Have you ever, just out of curiosity, have you ever purchased something or some things where you've thought to yourself, oh, I'm not going to use this now, but I'll be using this down the road?
Books. So freaking many that I seriously have a problem. I just talked to Ryan. He like talks about a book. I'm like, oh, I'll get that. Then I get Amazon suggests like 3 other ones. I'm like, oh, these all sound interesting. Like, oh, I have a problem and I need to like I've been better since I've been aware of this minimalism, because you aren't aware of this stuff, right? Like you have enough money to buy it, but you don't need it, and then it just starts taking up space and you end up wasting the money. So yeah, like I have so many books that I haven't read that are on that shelf, and it talks about in these books how you tell yourself lies like one day I'm going to read it when I have more time. But your interests change, and I've been finding that out the more I'm like free and not in school. That's funny the way I said that. I've been finding it out more and more that there's certain things that I'm really into while I'm in a certain phase of my life. And Marie Kondo talks about this. The time you should read a book is when you're excited about it. If you buy it for later, then you'll always have something currently that you're excited about. So you won't get to that book because you'll be reading the new stuff you're excited about. So I do recommend not going overboard on books and letting whatever is guiding you currently guide you towards the book you want to read. Read that book and see where you're guided, where your interests are guiding you next. Don't stock up on like 10 books on a specific topic, because I've done that before. And then I lose interest in that topic next month. It's something else. And then all of a sudden I haven't read those 9 other books.
Yes. And it also takes a financial hit as well, because you probably, books nowadays, especially if you're into, personal development books, a lot of them aren't, $10 books, right? You're putting, when you look at those Amazon recommendations, you're spending 20, 25, 30 here and there.
Yes,
so, yeah.
no, and it adds up. Fortunately, now I'm in a position where I can afford it if I wanted to, but they're unnecessary, so there's no need to do it. But and that's another thing. Just you reminded me, I have more money now than I've had ever before. And I can honestly say that it does not in and of itself influence my happiness. There was situations where, like the 2 summers ago, before I started actually making money on YouTube, I was in a situation where I had very little money. I had to cancel Tidal, which is like a Spotify kind of thing for music. And I remember like feeling bad at the time because my girlfriend at the time was using it, and I was like, oh man, I'm gonna have to tell her that like I can't afford $10 a month to keep paying. And I was like, oh man, this sucks. And I was even ready to borrow money from my one friend. He said he'd give me $1,000 because my dad didn't want to, because he wasn't a fan of the YouTube stuff and I really wanted to focus on the YouTube stuff. He's come around though, he's fine now. But yeah, so that was an issue. And then luckily my friend said he'd let me borrow it, but I was working hard on the YouTube stuff and I started actually making money on it before I needed to borrow the money from my friend to hold me out for the summer until school started, because I had some money coming from school. But yeah, so I was in that situation, and yet I was no less happy than I am now, where I don't have that kind of fear that I won't have money. But I mean, you always have that fear, to be honest, but I feel like at that point I was just as happy as I am now, even though I have more money now than I had then. And really, money is just that freedom for me that lets me do what I want to do every day, and not something that I want to use to buy materialistic things, for example.
Yeah, and the book talks about happiness and how happiness isn't this state that we win when we accomplish things, because the thing is, when we accomplish something, reach a goal, gain maybe financial stability, we're going to be unsatisfied after a while. Then we're going to want more things, and we're a species that continues to desire things more and more. So really, happiness isn't this idea of accomplishing things, but instead the book says happiness is something that could only be felt in this moment. And I really like the idea, the focus on like presentism, especially relating to last week's topic of the slow movement, that importance of living in the moment. So I think what is important is, if you're interested in minimalizing certain things in your life, and the book suggests this as well, right? We can't just be like waiting for this future moment when things settle down.
Exactly.
Right? We have to take, similar to the War of Art, we have to take action now, right? Even just taking small steps now is important, instead of saying, well, I'm in school right now, or I'm having a tough time at work, or I'm kind of in a transition period. I don't really have time to minimalize my things or just go through this reflective process, right? You'll never have time to do this stuff. Really, your life will never settle down in one way or another.
It's probably going to get more busy, to be honest.
So really, we have to think of this stuff right now. And really, by, I think, living in the moment and thinking through this stuff, that's when the happiness occurs, by being in the moment and doing this stuff.
Yes, and here's a quote that to me speaks beautifully, and it's like a epiphany for anybody who's like kind of experienced this, which I think should be all of us. But he talks about how we get used to external things and how it's never enough. Like you said, if you're always looking in the future, you're training your mind to find happiness in the future, and you'll never be happy in the present. You need to, with whatever you have, you need to be happy now. And then you can focus on like improving your financial situation or whatever. But as long as you're like, I won't be happy until, that until will keep moving every time you approach it. Like when you get closer, it just keeps moving like your shadow. Like you're never gonna kind of get hold of it. So this is the quote. Many of our wishes have actually been granted. So think of a job interview you went to that you really wanted, or let's say a mark you really want to get, or a bike you really wanted to get, or something, whatever. Could even be a partner. And then, so why don't we feel satisfied? We get used to things. We eventually get used to the new state where our wishes have been fulfilled. We start taking those things for granted, and there comes a time when we start getting tired of what we have. So that's the kind of thing that the consumerist kind of society feeds off of, that constant need to, you finally get used to it. Think of a new jacket you bought, new shoes you bought. You're very excited maybe the first few times you wear them, and then it wears off and you feel like getting another dopamine spike by buying something new, and it never ends. Another amazing quote was, so this was on page 63. He titles this section, "Can Bill Gates Eat 6 Meals in a Single Day?" And he says, sadly, whether you buy a ring that costs $100, $500, or $3,000, the level of happiness that you'll feel is basically the same. And to me, that's huge. That's so powerful, because it's right. Like, let's say you're getting married. Will it really make a big difference happiness-wise, which is what, at the end of the day, most of us are chasing, our own forms of happiness, what makes us happy? Will it really change if you get a $100,000 ring or a $500 ring? Like,
well, I'm not the person to ask, but
I'm just saying, hypothetical question.
But like, I presume it's that
I don't think
moment.
So. For
it's
me,
that moment of receiving the ring that will bring the happiness, not necessarily the ring itself.
It's the thought. It's the person who gives it. It's what it represents. You should reassess your values if actually like a $50,000 ring gives you a hugely different level of happiness than like $1,000 ring or whatever. So to me, that's very powerful, and I agree 100%. We tend to think that if we get something more expensive, something better, something new, we'll feel happier, but it's a fleeting thing. And that's why minimalism is so powerful. Once you start giving away things and not just accumulating more and more and more and more, and then you'll all of a sudden start appreciating what you do have. You'll start appreciating the people around you because you're not so distracted with materialistic things. And then all of a sudden you can start developing that happiness within, because that's the only place you're going to find any kind of lasting happiness. It's not going to be within materialistic things, because that'll just pass quickly. And you're not always going to feel happy, but a sustainable, good baseline of happiness will be achieved once you start looking within, rather than trying to look without to fill that empty hole inside.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think why some people are obsessed with material things, and I mean, like, I went through it. I am getting better, but I did go through
I was horrible. I'm going to tell you stories. You're pretty good, but go. You tell me yours.
I was going to say, like, material for us, I talked about how books represent a certain identity. Material for a lot of people represent, like, your wealth, right? They represent your status in society. And so many people are afraid to look like poor or like we don't have anything, right?
Yes.
If you brought a date over and you had almost nothing in your house, just the bare minimum, right? You may think, oh, have anxiety. Oh, this person's going to think I don't have much, right? I don't want to look poor. And we have this societal fear of looking poor or not having much. And I mean, that's something I'm really interested in. Topics about, like, practicing poverty. A lot of Stoics talk about practicing poverty and going
I want
without.
to talk about that too. Yeah.
Yes, but I think the reason why we feel we need so many things is because we want to just kind of flaunt how much money, or if we don't even have that much money, but we still have a lot of things to show, like, to put a facade
for others,
to be like, others, to put a facade to be like, listen, I have something going for me. Look at these things. Obviously something's going for me in my life.
Like rooms, for example, you don't use in a house.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Four
it's
extra rooms.
It's like, oh, these people have a big house. I live in an apartment. Now I got to move into a bigger house because I can't, they have an extra 3 rooms. I need extra 3 rooms, It's like, it's this constant rat race. And at the end of the day, you're always going to find someone who has more materialistic things than you, who has a nicer car. Because as soon as you move up in the money you're getting, you're going to move within a new, probably neighborhood, a nicer house. And then all of a sudden you might go from being kind of the richest in your street to getting a bigger house and being the poorest in that street because everyone is rich there and has big houses. So it never ends, that comparison.
Yeah, for sure. And again, going back to living in the future, so many times we buy houses or places to live because we're like, well, in the future, we'll probably need it for X. And a lot of times that doesn't happen, right?
Exactly.
I have an organ in my basement, and the reason I got the organ.
You do? Okay, this is
an
a
organ.
Real story. Okay.
It's not like a full.
Is that like a piano kind of thing?
Yes. No, it's not. It's not an organ from your body. Don't worry. But,
I have an organ in my basement,
which I guess is
how Freudian is
yes.
that? Okay.
But no, type of keyboard. And at the time, I thought, oh, this is great because in the future, I really want to say, when I move, I want to have this organ with me. But I'll be honest with you, I think I've played it maybe 3 times in my life. And now I've gotten to the point I'm like, I have to put this thing on Kijiji because it's just taking up space.
And it's so cumbersome to move with.
Exactly. And that's what the book talks about, right? Whenever you're going through things, think about, let's just say unexpectedly you had to move the next day, right? Or someone came into your house and stole things, right? What things would you be emotional about? Which things would you bring with you if you had to move right away and you didn't have time to go through everything? Or number 2, if someone stole something in your house, which things would you become upset at that they stole? Or which things would you be like, well, they stole it, whatever, right? Because those things that you're kind of shrugging your shoulders at, those are the things you probably have to think hard about.
Yes.
Do I need these?
And this is maybe weird and no one's ever done this. Like, I didn't read this anywhere, but I imagine, like, people go through situations where their house burns down and they lose, like, everything. So that's kind of, I helped myself get rid of some things by just saying that. It's like, oh, well, imagine I like there was a fire, whatever, I lost it. There's nothing I can do. I kind of put myself in that mental space just if I want to get rid of something that I should get rid of. So that's something I found helpful for sure. And he talks about situations where literally it was one of the earthquakes in Japan, and people had their physical possessions falling down on them and like actually threatening their lives. And that's one of the things that actually made him change, because he went huge transformation. He had a bunch of books. He had a huge room where like you couldn't see the floor, like there was stuff everywhere. And when there was an earthquake, the books started falling down and actually threatening his life.
Yeah.
So he's like, okay, I need to fix this because my things are actually threatening my safety.
It's not just our things own us, our things could kill us.
Exactly. And yeah, it's like you own this, you own that, you own this, and before you know it, your things end up owning you. What does that mean? For example, I have a friend, obviously nameless, but he bought like around a $50,000 car as soon as he got a job. That is a situation where he didn't have money and he had to buy, what is it called when you buy something and you don't have the money?
Get a loan?
Yeah, maybe something like that. Yeah, and so he's paying monthly, right? And it's not his. And now he needs to maintain that job that he doesn't like just so he can pay off the car. And yet, if he didn't buy the car, he'd have less debts and he'd have more freedom to go after a job he likes. So that's why for me, like when I was getting a car, I just got used car. Like, you know, I wanted actually like even less expensive car, but I split it with my brother, and we ended up like settling for like a $10,000. We each paid $5,000, which, you know, more than I wanted to spend, but I mean it's insane the car we got for it, and I could have made do with like a way cheaper car. But the point is, there's no way I'm gonna buy a car I can't afford right now. No way. And I can honestly say that after doing it, I 100% am thankful that I didn't give in to that urge to buy a new car, because new cars, like as soon as you drive them off the lot, they lose so much value. And especially when you're young, at this point in your life, you should be trying to build the life you want, trying to make, you know, do the stuff you really love. You should always do this, never mind the young thing. And by getting like these materialistic things that aren't for necessity, they're just because that car is more expensive or it's nicer, you're trading your freedom. That's the best way to describe it. You're trading your energy and freedom doing something you don't want to do just so you can drive this coffin on wheels to your job and drive it back. You know what I mean? Like, it's just I hate that. I just hate it.
So you won't be working as a car salesman anytime soon, trying to promote new cars?
Well, I mean, you never know what could happen. You know, now I was gonna tell you that I used to be way worse with buying materialistic things, and that's why I'm really glad I ran into minimalism, and like I felt drawn to it, and now I'm glad I read these books because I'm more aware of it now, because I wasn't as aware of it. And yeah, I always had for a while in my bank account when I was in school around $2,000 in my bank account. And when I'd get more, I'd spend it because I'm like, oh, 2,000 is a good amount for a student to have in their bank account. I've
reached my goal now.
Exactly. So like, oh, I got an extra 5,000. Let's spend that on a new laptop or whatever, or let's spend that on a new computer, or let's spend that on this and this and this. So I'm at the point right now where I have 3 laptops. One of those laptops could serve fine, but yet I got 3 because I felt this need to buy materialistic things. Like I wanted like a pick-me-up through materialistic consumption, and because I could. But I did not need that, and I regret the fact that like I actually purchased that when one laptop would have been fine. Now I kind of convinced myself that I'd need them for different things, or this one was kind of heavy. It would be nice to have a lighter one to write with, and it was just carry it to a coffee shop, you know. And it's like just these.
This is my coffee shop.
Yes, it's sad. It's first world problems, but I actually convinced myself of this, and that's the crazy lies our brains can tell us when we're unaware of it. And with minimalism, I feel like I've gotten the tools, the framework, to be able to identify when I'm acting in this way and when I'm consuming to fill like some kind of hole inside, rather than trying to realize that consumeristic things, materialistic things won't do that, and you need to find fulfillment elsewhere, either through doing stuff you love, exercise, meditation, spending time with loved ones, right? Using things and loving people rather than loving things and using people.
Yeah, and I know like the very influential, impactful parts of the books for you, a lot of it was like the physical cleaning, right? But
I told you philosophy was my favorite part, but
yes.
It was the most practical was like the cleaning.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, something that I took in terms of some of these minimalist ideas, were applying it to things like diet. Mm-hmm. Specifically, like now I've been reflecting for the last number of months on this, but more than ever since encountering minimalism was just the idea of there were so many times in my past where I would consume, snacks in between meals, or consume something after already eating my meal, like dinner, going and consuming more food. And really, like, I'm really reflecting on, what do I really need to stay healthy, right? I don't need an abundance of things. So I think it really applies to, my own thought process of what I'm putting into my body, right? Especially what I've been trying to do every once in a while. We started it a couple months ago, and I try to do it not as devoutly every week like I did before, but every once in a while I try to fast once a week or so. And it's just kind of...
And that's, to clarify, no eating anything for that whole day until the next day. So that's, you can drink kind of water. Sometimes we drank even coffee, but there was no actual food consumed that day.
And what it really helped me to do was rethink my purchases, right? Because obviously I went through that whole day without eating. I didn't die. I didn't feel extremely sick. I was able to get through it. And so really applying what I do on my fasting days to other days, there's so many times where if I just have a little urge of hunger, I feel that I have to go and buy something or eat something or make something at home and spend money preparing things. And what it's allowed me to do is really think about what's like the essential things I need to eat.
And
right?
check your impulses, right? Check
Yes.
your initial impulses, because they are often misleading.
Yes.
And if you often go like, oh, I really feel like this jacket right now. Will you feel like that, like buying this jacket right now? Will you feel that way in like a week?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, will you feel like you need that dessert in an hour when you are busy doing something else? Or you just kind of need a break and you're bored now and you feel like eating that dessert?
And that's the danger of something like fast food, right?
Yes.
You could just go somewhere and just get it so quickly, and really you don't even have time to process your decision. You just have an urge, and you're passing by a McDonald's and you think, oh, this will be quick, right? This won't do much.
And that's what I'm saying. All this stuff is connected. Like this fasting, the exercising, the minimalism, like they all feed meditation. They all feed into each other. Slow movement. They all feed into each other to make for like a more disciplined life, and in my opinion, a happier life. And when you practice, that's why I'm so responsive right now to minimalism, because we did all this other stuff, right? Maybe if I didn't do any of that, I wouldn't even care about minimalism. But because I'm open-minded, because I tried all these other stuff and it's helped me, I'm also open-minded to minimalism, and it all feeds into it. So minimalism helps me want to not eat like a glutton, doing that fasting helps me check my consumeristic urges. Waking up early to run every day helps me be more disciplined when it comes to doing my work, my business. So it all feeds into each other. And all of these episodes, although they seem like different topics, really they're all related and like revolve around the same thing of trying to improve our lives, even 1% at a time. And that adds up crazy. Yeah.
And I mean, I feel like though we maybe haven't said the word, we've talked about minimalism so far in our episodes, right? When we had Matt on here, he was talking about his priorities in life, and he was talking about how it's important, instead of just having your hands in multiple baskets and not being able to really focus on one or two things, the importance of making a decision and really minimalizing what your focus wants to be in life, and then going deep in those things, right? Instead of just skimming the surface on a bunch of things. And I think that's very applicable to minimalism, right? To our pursuing different paths in lives, right? We can't just pursue every single path, right? We need to make decisions at a time, and some of those decisions are difficult, but we need to sometimes in life just focus on a small amount of things and really dive deeply and pursue those and take risks. And then if they don't work out, they don't work out, but at least we decided what was important in that moment. And I think that's important, really being able to make the decision what's important right now.
Yes. And knowing, kind of not being, that coming from the right place, let's say. Because, if you meditate, if you exercise, if you do all these things that we've been talking about in these podcasts, like you're likely to be much more in control and conscious of your behavior. The problem is when you're unconscious with your behavior and you act kind of before you even think about what you're doing, and then all of a sudden you can be like, oh, I feel like dessert now. I feel like buying this now. I feel like, like having that space where you can consciously make a decision and be like, yes, right now I have a goal to get financial freedom, let's say independence. So I'm not going to splurge on this. I'm going to save up money. I'm going to go work more and stuff like that.
Sure. It's interesting how, all these things are connected. If you cut corners in one thing, it oftentimes affects other things. You cut corners in other aspects of your life. I'll admit, last week, was it last week or over the weekend, I kind of cut corners on workout exercising I was doing. And that in turn later on in the day, I basically gave into...
You're a terrible person.
Yes, gave into some foods that I would normally reject and say, no, I don't need this. And that in turn led to another decision of me, doing something that normally, I would resist. So like all these things, when you take just shortcuts in one aspect, a lot of times it's a domino effect.
Yes.
Just like when you don't...
momentum, either positive or negative.
Yes, when you're pushing through resistance, usually that applies to other things in life. I know Jocko Willink, who is kind of a motivational speaker,
Are
former...
you going to talk about making your bed?
Making my bed?
Yeah, I think he talks about that.
No, I think he does, but he talks about the his argument about the importance of getting up early, or at least earlier than you normally do. And what he says is like, by getting up early, what it does is it propels good decisions throughout the day. So then later on in the day at work, when you're offered a box of donuts to choose any 4 donuts you want, you're not Homer Simpson putting donuts on each one of his fingers.
Yes.
You're resisting that because you've resisted staying in bed in the morning. So he talks about how, that domino effect. It doesn't have to be getting up early, but really anything.
Yeah, and the more you do it, you build on top of it. So let's say for him, for example, he'll get up early, make his bed, go for a workout. After you do all these things, let's say get some work done, after you're on this positive trajectory where you've done all of this positive things, pick the good thing, let's say, objectively, then you're way less likely to, give into fast food, way less likely to do that. But if you wake up late, you leave your bed a mess, you're late for class, you're much more likely to grab fast food. It just makes
because you're always
sense.
Behind, right?
And you don't have time to even think, right?
No.
And it starts as soon as you wake up, for sure. It starts in the morning, and that sets the tone for your day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like what it also does is like it's important because we talk about the importance of having like a clear mind and like clear thinking and clear writing, right? And I think minimalism spills into that as well. When we're more clear about our objectives, we set reasonable objectives, not a whole bunch of tasks that we have to do which are out of our reach, which if we don't accomplish will stress us out. Going back to grad school, when every day I would set these goals, which most of them I knew I couldn't reach, and then I would still try to pursue them. And if I didn't, that would stress me out and, lead negatively to the next day of me getting up and feeling, oh, I haven't accomplished yesterday's goals, I'm not going to today.
Negative loop,
it obviously, negative loop. So it affects your mind negatively, and your mind is just cluttered with things, talking about, cluttered with physical things, just cluttered with mental pressures. So
yeah, and that's one of the biggest things with school. I remember walking through life in a haze. Like sometimes I wasn't even conscious when you had a lot of assignments due, and you knew they were coming up. It's like you walk through life in a haze. You don't fully experience the moment.
No, for sure, right? And that's why so many times you may go into a seminar room and you're just blank because you just have all these things you have to do afterwards, and it's just like, how can I be present right now in a conversation when I have all these pressures to fulfill these assignments? So yeah, for sure, minimalism definitely can help you in decluttering your mind and thinking about
decluttering your environment.
Your own priorities in life.
Marie Kondo says it well in her book, where she says, once you take care of the clutter in your house is a distraction. Your dirty room is a distraction from actually figuring out that, yeah, you may not be happy with life, or you may have some stuff that you haven't taken care of that you should take care of, kind of like resistance we talked about. Resistance could come in the form of a cluttered room. It takes your mind off it. In a clean room, once you clean your stuff and put things in order, then all of a sudden you're much more likely to see and face the problems you have in life and conquer them once your room is clean. And she talks about how when a lot of people are studying, they feel the need to clean their room because they feel like they can't focus on the important task until they took care of their surrounding. So yeah, it's not just, this is the life-changing magic of tidying up. Even me, I admit, that sounded super like lame. You know what I mean? Tidying up. Like in my mind, I was like, man, I want to talk about philosophy. I want to talk about these great ideas. I don't want to talk about like cleaning my room. But it's true. Like I gave it a shot, and the book is way better than I thought it would be. And especially Goodbye Things. And the idea is true. Once you handle this area of your life, everything else will be easier. It's one of those pillars that once you get down, you're much more able to face the rest of your life effectively. And one YouTuber that I saw, and I'll link it below because I don't remember his name right now, but he's the same guy that has the exact same shirt, that he wears the same shirt, 7 copies of the same shirt. He went into minimalism. He was $97,000 in debt. He started doing minimalism, practicing the philosophy, living that lifestyle. And you'd think minimalism, not pursuing like materialistic things, that would kill ambition, right? That would kill wanting to do good work or wanting to do anything. But no, he has now 1.4 million subscribers on YouTube and a successful podcast. And he actually said, and I wrote it down here, minimalism actually makes him, and he says it could make you more productive because it drops the unnecessary stuff from your life. So he says, even if he and I agree with this, even if he had all the money in the world, had every paycheck, every bill in the future paid for, he never had to worry about money again, he'd still be doing what he does. And ironically, when you focus on the process, when you focus on doing what you love, I find that most people get way more money than they expected to get, or they would have got if they just focused on the money. Gary Vee also says he doesn't have a problem with people doing stuff for money. It's just the quickest way not to make money. So when you're focused on money, it's way less likely that you're actually gonna get it. But when you focus on living a life you love, when you focus on the process, then all of a sudden you find you're doing more work because you're less distracted. The work fulfills you, and people sense that, and they actually will be willing to, let's say, watch your YouTube videos, listen to your podcast, and help you out when you need financial help, like on Patreon or whatever. So the universe is funny in that when you start doing what you like to do and focusing on the process, in my experience and in a lot of other people's experience that I've read about and seen and heard and talked about, the financial stuff takes care of itself. It just comes into your life, and actually more of it comes than it would have if you were just focused on money and went from job to job that you hated, but thought you were doing it for the money. Because I never thought, and I've said this before, but I never thought that YouTube, when I started, could ever be a job. I never thought it could make money. I didn't know that was a thing. I just started doing because I loved it. And then it ended up turning into like a financially viable career path. So that was amazing. Yeah.
So I think when something that's mentioned in the book, which is related to that, is that talking about flow state, right? The idea of when you are doing something such as working at something or being in the moment, such as meditation, right? You're doing something where you're not worried about time. You're in this hugely deep state of concentration. And really the way that you're able to get there, one of the ways you're able to get there is by reducing the distractions and unnecessary things. So yeah, so a lot of this links to the idea of flow state, which again links to last week's 100%. Conversation about the slow movement and living in the moment. And really, I think what it goes down to, like the idea of, you were talking about cleaning your room and the benefits of that, it just makes you feel like, even if, you have an essay due and you're just going to clean your room, it makes you feel like you're in control of something, which I think is important psychologically, right? Instead of feeling that these things control us, these factors, or even these objects, right? Such as like the expensive house or expensive car.
Taking action is the quickest way out of any rut.
Yeah, you feel like you're in control of one situation, even if it's as menial as cleaning your room, or even if it's as menial as, I don't know, cutting your fingernails because they've been getting long. You're
weird example.
That is a weird example, yes. Yes. But, some other aspect, or even, cleaning, your desktop, something else, right? It gets this idea of, you're in control of something, even if it's something small. And when you feel you're in control of one thing, then maybe you're able to get to that essay and feel I'm able to do it. Right?
Little steps leading up to bigger
going
steps.
back to atomic habits, right? We just put in, instead of thinking we have to take this giant step, right? We just take these small steps, and then they end up, creating momentum.
And that's the lesson that I got from many things in life, including writing, and running is great for this. If you focus on the end result the whole time and how much time you have left, that time will pass by like the slowest thing in the world, like a snail, like you're watching a snail, you're watching water boil. It will pass by so slow. But if you accept that you're doing this, you enjoy doing it, you're focusing on the next step constantly, or you're not worried about when you'll finish, time will fly by. Like, for example, flow states I get in while writing, and I will be like, in the morning, like a lot of writers talk about, I won't want to write, and I'll be like, come up with excuses, I'll procrastinate, and then I'll finally sit down, and time just flies by once you start writing. And the next thing you know, it's been an hour, it's been 2 hours, because you get lost, you get into that flow state. Even this podcast right now, we're talking, it feels like we just sat down. It's already been like an hour. So that's the beauty of that flow state, and it's much easier, you're right, to get into when you don't have distractions. If I have stuff on my table getting in the way, it'll knock me out of that flow state. If I have Facebook open, if I have other distractions open, it'll get me out of that flow state. So this will help you what I want to say is, this will not only help your happiness, this will actually paradoxically help you financially, because you'll actually have less distractions and focus more on the work and enjoy your work, which will end up bringing more money into your life. And it'll also help if you're not buying stuff you don't need.
Yeah, for sure. Because then you'll start thinking about, when it comes to the work, what is essential at this time, right? So many times, I think, when it comes to writing, for example, writers get distracted because they have so many ideas, they don't know what to pursue, or they have, they're writing and they have 5 different tabs open, and they're, by having a minimalist...
close Facebook, close Instagram.
By having a minimalist mindset, you're able to focus on that 1 or 2 tasks in the moment that are important for you to enter that flow state.
Just one. It should be one right now. At the moment, you should always be focusing on one task, because multitasking won't get you in a flow state.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
if you divide your attention.
For sure.
And I feel like we discussed some awesome stuff already, but I do want to talk about just kind of what you were saying about Stoics, and saying the idea of practicing poverty. Like, that sounds crazy, right? And we don't mean it in an offensive way, but the idea is, Seneca talks about it, of, let's say everyone fears losing money. So let's say you're working really hard, you're at a job maybe you don't like, and it's not your calling, or it's not something you love to do, and you're so scared. You're like, oh man, if I don't keep doing this, if I don't keep pushing myself, I'll end up losing all this stuff, living poor, being poor. And what practicing poverty, or let's say, for example, like we did, fasting is an example of that. Let's say not using technology, going to one of those retreats, or just stimulating in your house that people have, where you have to kind of hand in your electronics. They talk about it in the book. let's say laptops, anything like that, distractions. You get like one pair of clothing, and you get only necessary meals, and you can focus, let's say, on writing on pen and paper or something like that. And once you do that, you see there's nothing to be scared of. Like you don't need as much money as you think you do. You'll be fine. Seneca says that we really, if you're only going for what we need and not what culturally we think we should have because people expect it for us to have it and you're worried what people think, if you just focus on what you truly need, that's not a lot at all. And you shouldn't ever, he says, wait to become a philosopher when you have the money, because if anything, money is a distraction, and you should become a philosopher now and attain those basic needs while you're doing that. And I think it was very powerful stuff, and I highly recommend everybody read Seneca. We're going to be talking about it in the book club next week as well, on the shortness of life, but I got all of his letters too. And there's just some amazing, obviously he was rich for a large portion of his life, so he wasn't coming from a place where he didn't have a choice but to be poor. But I do think there's like immense value in his words, and he was always ready to lose everything. And when it did happen, which, you know, he did lose a lot of his things down the line, it wasn't as crushing as it would have been if he was so reliant on those materialistic things. By practicing not having it, by practicing losing it, for example, you realize it's not a big deal. You take that fear away from yourself, like, oh, what if I lose my job? What if I can't pay money? I'll be on the street, whatever. Overreacting. If you practice it, then you realize, hey, it's not a big deal. All of a sudden, you're more relaxed. You can do better work. And ironically, you make more money when you're ready or willing to be poor, and you're no longer afraid of it. You'll actually start to make more money because you're more willing to take risks. You're more willing to think logically clearly, and you're going to be less distracted by fears of, oh no, what if I lose it all?
Yeah, for sure. And if you want to learn more about Stoicism and people like Seneca's ideas of practicing poverty or practicing misfortune, you could check out the Daily Stoic, which I believe is Ryan Holiday's website based off his book, dailystoic.com. He has an article up talking about today's Stoic practice misfortune. And he gets a little bit more into detail about what we were talking about. As well. Not too long ago, I was listening to Tim Ferriss's podcast. We're a big fan of his podcast and his books.
Let me just say a specific episode that you should check out is where he reads from Seneca's letters, and it's called On Philosophy and Riches, I'm pretty sure. Just look that up, Tim Ferriss. It's like 12 minutes, and it's gold. It's gold. It talks about this stuff exactly.
For sure. He also has something else, which I'm sure is related, How to Practice Poverty. It's episode 137, How to Practice Poverty and Reduce Fear. Which
exactly,
I believe
that's it.
That's the episode, which he reads directly from Seneca.
That's it, yeah.
So, I mean, there are other people talking about this topic. I mean, the interesting part is these are very well-off people.
Exactly.
Right? It's not like they have financial burdens that are, they're like, oh, well, this is an excuse why I'm like this, right? They're very well off, very successful, yet they find it necessary to, not indulge and really do the opposite, right?
Yes.
Don't indulge at all and really see how far you could go without needing certain things.
James Franco, I believe this is a quote of his, said that today rich people wear Gucci and Armani, and poor people wear Gucci and Armani, and rich people wear Levi's and Converse. And the idea is today rich people, like, if you actually have money, not even like, let's say rich, but if you have money, then most people aren't worried about looking stylish. They're worried about more like important things, ideally, like, for example, doing meaningful work, While if you don't have money, you're more likely to be obsessed with making it look like you have money. And then that ends up being a negative spiral where you spend more money to make it look like you have money, and then you get more and more in debt, or you can't get out of that circle, like that hole. So I definitely suggest, especially if you're in debt. Me and Ryan are lucky enough that, you know, we're not in debt, and that's in large part to obviously work ethic, and also the fact that we don't constantly try to impress people with the materialistic things we buy, because we could spend all our money on one watch, really, if we wanted to. Like, there are watches there worth tens of millions of dollars. But if you're focusing on the actual stuff, the process, you don't need that much to be happy. And that, ironically, paradoxically, it's a rule of the universe. It seems to be true time and time again. If you are ready to be poor, if you're willing to do what you love and risk getting paid less, or, you know, having to even possibly struggle financially, it seems like the universe kicks in. And as long as you're putting in the work, you're putting in your dues, you're paying your dues, you're focusing on the process, it seems to work out, and you could become much richer than you would have otherwise.
Yeah, for sure. And is there anything you'd like to add? I know we want to give a plug to our next episode, which is our book club, which, interestingly enough, we're talking about Seneca. We mentioned Seneca and Stoicism briefly, which it'll link very nicely to this episode. But anything else?
Well, let's read some Fight Club quotes, because Fight Club is important, obviously, for us. Like, it's always at the intro of our episodes. And what I like Goodbye Things was that Fumio Sasaki actually mentioned some Fight Club quotes. So I'll just reread some. And it's always good, like I said, to listen to stuff you've heard before, because we forget over the course of the day, over the course of weeks. We forget this stuff, and it's nice to be reminded. So here's a few quotes, and then we'll get back to Ryan. You're not your job. You're not how much money you have in the bank. You're not the car you drive. You're not the contents of your wallet. You're not your fucking khakis. So that's one of the probably the most famous ones. And then it's only after we've lost everything that we're free to do anything. And a cool thing about the Fight Club thing is that he kind of his house goes on fire, right? And he loses his materialistic things, and he's like, oh man, my life was in that apartment. But then he realizes actually he gets much more meaning and happiness out of life when he's not focusing on those materialistic things. So that was very cool. And also a quote that's not from Fight Club, but from the book, which I really liked. You're the only one who's worried about your face. That was a quote from someone else, but I really like that. The same kind of idea was said by that YouTuber I was talking about, where he was asked, do people care? Do they talk about you wearing the same clothes? And they're like, no one cares. No one notices. Everyone's too worried about themselves. So don't be concerned with what other people think of you. They're gonna pay attention to you maybe for a second, if that. They're focusing on their own problems. So make sure you're being the person you want to be, living by your own values, doing what's important to you, and minimalism can help you focus in on that rather than just being a cog in the machine and mindlessly consuming things, and then being in a position where you're in debt. You have to work jobs you don't like just to get out of debt. It's much better to, if you're in debt, get out of debt as soon as possible, and don't spend stuff on things you don't need. As Gary Vee says, don't buy stupid shit, and focus on doing what you love and not making unnecessary purchases.
Yeah, and this applies to life as well, like going back to school, right? Our school episode, the idea of pursuing degrees or pursuing double majors, triple majors, just for the sake of keeping yourself busy and acquiring as many credentials as you can, right? We want to try to figure out what's important to us and minimalize that. So for sure, I mean, these lessons carry on far beyond just the physical. Now, for next week, we're going to be talking about Seneca's On the Shortness of Life. Very short book. I believe it's only around 100 pages or so.
Yes, it's super short. Yeah, like there's no, it's like the perfect book for you to read if you're short on time or whatever. If you have more time, you can spend more time like focusing on it. But yeah, it's definitely not a long one. I don't think it's expensive either, especially if you have a Kindle. It's like, I think on Kindle, I believe, if I'm not incorrect, it was like $4.99 or something. So like super cheap, and the value you get from it is like insanely more valuable than you'll spend on it. So definitely get that book.
Yeah, and I think really any age you can read it. It really puts your life into perspective.
Yes.
Makes you think about your mortality, makes you think about not necessarily, regretting your past, but taking action right now.
Yeah, quote from the book is, life is not too short. It's just, if we spend it correctly, it's not too short. It's when you don't spend it correctly, when you don't do the things you want to do, when you don't take risks, that's when it starts to feel short, because your life will be filled with regrets. But if you schedule your day properly, right? If you do the important work, if you don't focus on materialistic things, let's say if you go travel with someone you love, that's better than watching all the seasons of Lost alone in your room. I'm sorry to all the Lost fans, but it is. So figure out kind of what's important to you. And yeah, and there's also in this book talks about experiences are much more correlated with happiness than materialistic things. So keep that in mind moving forward.
For sure. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for listening this week. We'll see you next week, and make sure that you are reading Seneca's On the Shortness of Life. It won't take you long. So until then, take care.